ACNFers, if you want signed, personalized copies of The Frontrunner for the holiday season, you better hurry. Email me creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll email you a PayPal invoice, or you could just mail me a physical check. Remember those, so PayPal doesn't skim off its fee. And then I'll ask you how you want your book personalized. It'll be $30 total, and that covers that really ritzy media rate shipping while supplies last. I got lots of supplies, so go for it. This podcast is also sponsored with this house ad for Pitch Club, the monthly Substack where you read cold pitches and hear the authors audio annotating their thinking behind how they sold and crafted their pitches that landed publication. There are 3 atavist writers so far featured. I just landed a pitch, and I'm going to annotate that. I might annotate book proposal overview. Yeah, I'm going to jump in. Why not? It's my thing. Welcome to Pitch Club. Welcome to Pitch Club. Fucking idiot. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com. And also, this podcast secured the sponsorship of the word disappointment. The act or an instance of disappointing, the state of emotion of being disappointed, or one that disappoints, or how passive-aggressive moms get their points across.
There's no coasting.
Yeah.
You know, what's next for the artist means you have to climb the mountain again as if you've never climbed it before.
OACNFers, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. I'm Brendan O'Mara. AI openly said, nah, we're not going to copy you. You know, I heard an advertisement on the radio about a restaurant in town or across the river that said something to the effect of blah, 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 like it's 1995, back when we had something to prove. And I'm like, you no longer have something to prove? Seems like an odd thing to celebrate. I, for one, approach each and every week with something to prove on this show because your attention is finite, and George Saunders I am not. Jason Brown is here. He's a brilliant short story writer and the author of the memoir Character Witness, published by University of Nebraska Press. It's an incredible book. And we recorded this conversation at the end of October, I know, as the 4th and final live podcast of the year at Gratitude Brewing here in Eugene. Our next live one is scheduled for January 25th at Sunday. It's a Sunday, naturally, 1 p.m. With Daniel Pollock Pelsner. More on that in a few weeks, but figured I'd plant the seed if you're in the region. Jason, as luck would have it, teaches at the University of Oregon in their writing department, forging the young minds who will publish in the most obscure lit journals, the future bitter podcasters of America. Sorry, I'm speaking from experience. I'm projecting, okay? But thanks to Jason and his clout with the university, we had our biggest gathering of the year, live and in person. There's something pretty rad about the in-person jam. Show notes to this episode and more at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, bookmark it, man. So you can browse for hot blogs and sign up for the 2 very important newsletters, the flagship Rage Against the Algorithm and Pitch Club. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com. I don't charge for anything regarding either of those newsletters, but your permission is payment. As I like to say, I can leverage that for maybe book contracts down the road, or if you want to hire me to help you with a pitch or coach up a piece of writing, that's always on the table. You can always reach out to me, whatever. We'll work something out. Also, if you care to support the podcast with a few dollar bills, you can go to patreon.com/CNFpod. It's probably where I'll host, or at least clue people into the hashtag Flash52 sessions. What? You don't know what that is? It was in the monthly Rager. Don't say I didn't tell you. So Jason Brown can be found at writerjasonbrown.com. He writes fiction and nonfiction and was a Stegner Fellow and Truman Capote Fellow at Stanford University, where he taught as a Jones lecturer. He has received fellowships from Yaddo and McDowell colonies. He taught for the MFA program at the University of Arizona and directs the MFA program at the U of O here in Eugene. He's the author of the collection Driving the Heart and Other Stories, Why the Devil Chose New England for his work, and his work has also appeared in the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Harper's, Best American Short Stories, the LA Times, and the Guardian, among others. This is getting obnoxious. In this conversation, we talk about persistence, hiking out from the moment, the atmospheric river of rejection, nice, escape velocity, woodworking, rule breakers, maturing around himself or yourself, depends, and working with Tobias Wolff. You know him. I don't need to tell you that this conversation was great, but I do need to tell you about this week's parting shot, about the bitter pill of rejection. But for now, cue up that riff.
You need to be a truffle pig.
But, it was a machete brandished.
I almost always have a very specific reader in mind.
I know. I sometimes wish I would have never done any of these things.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
So with no further ado, I give you Brendan O'Meara and Jason Brown in the Creative Nonfiction Podcast.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. What a crowd. This is great. And thanks to Gratitude for hosting us for the fourth and final live podcast of the Creative Nonfiction Podcast here, this quarterly series of In Real Life, our way of raging against the algorithm. So I'm really stoked to have all of you here and to enjoy and celebrate the work of Jason Brown. So let's get one more round of applause. There's a line in Character Witness, and we'll get to that in more depth, but it has to do with, at least in my experience, the inner life does not follow a linear path. And I like talking about the non-linearity of what it means to have a literary career. So in what way would you describe, the arc of your career and the ups and downs and the zigs and zags that have gotten you from, say, Driving the Heart to where we are now?
Well, I feel like first of all, thank you, Brendan and Ruby, for having me on. I really appreciate it, and I'm honored to be here. I feel like there are two tracks. One is the track of the artist, and one is, I suppose, the track of the career. I don't feel like they're the same track, and so I've gotten better, and I feel like my career's gotten worse. And that's not abnormal, because that's just how it works. Who's going to pay attention to you and why and for what reasons, and then there's your work and whether it deepens and gets more interesting, and which I feel like it really has, and that is through many, many years of working and as a on the work,
Yeah, well, it takes a tremendous amount of patience and repetition in writing through a lot of bad stuff before you get to even something that is remotely good or even competent.
Yeah.
So, just through your experience, how have you weathered that degree of patience and the bumpy road that it takes to get published, and weathering the bad writing to eventually get to the good?
I mean, I need a lot of help doing that. I'm looking over at my partner, Nicola, and she's endured, no one's paying attention to me, Right. No one cares. She's had to listen to a obscene amount of whining, but I'm also very stubborn in various ways that aren't so good for my career, but I feel like are good for the work itself. So it's just a matter of persistence. And the older you get, the one luxury you have is that it's too late to do anything else.
Yeah.
And so you may as well just go deeper in.
Right. Well, yeah, there's even a line in the memoir, too, where you talk about, almost fantasizing about other career tracks of, be it, going to Alaska and, getting to more carpentry and stuff. And, there were any number of detours along the freeway of on my own path of being a writer. I'm like, that exit looks really good. I could really pull off here and maybe get into winemaking or something.
Yeah.
And I did try that detour and it sucked. And I'm still back. I got back on this freeway. I don't know, about you, does it just pull you back in?
It's sort of the wrong time in my life to ask me that question, I feel like. I keep wondering if I'm frankly done, Mm-hmm. And I really love carpentry, and I'm getting a lot better at it. I also really love teaching. I really love these younger people many of whom are sitting here, who have so much enthusiasm and are passionate and they want to get better. And I get a lot of pleasure from that, being around that and that energy. I'm a little bit of it's like a monstrous energy sucker, in the guise of a teacher, I'm pretending to help them, but they're helping me. But no, I do have, the thing about writing is that, as my mentor Tobias Wolff said, it's always asking you, what have you done for me lately? It's not like being in a business or whatever where you maybe are really successful and then you get to coast. There's no coasting.
Yeah.
What's next for the artist means you have to climb the mountain again as if you've never climbed it before. I mean, yes, you have more skills, which means you can recognize sooner that your bad ideas are more apparent earlier in the process. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, you still got to go climb that mountain. And I guess I'm revealing something about myself that I'm a little bit of a baby. I don't want to. There's a part of me that always wants to hide from life and the difficult things. And so writing is difficult. Writing a good book that I'm going to be proud of is a huge amount of emotional energy, and time. So sometimes I wish I didn't have to. But then I find that I don't know what life means or who I am unless I'm constantly going back to that well. So the answer is I will always go back to the well, and I will write until I die. So.
Yeah, Ruby was saying a moment ago the fearlessness through which the work is coming to pass, and approaching that fear is very uncomfortable. So do you know that you're onto something when you're starting to maybe, the more uncomfortable you feel, the more you need to kind of push into that?
It depends entirely on the project. I mean, I really admire biographers like yourself, and I'm jealous because you get to go deeply into material that has nothing to do directly with yourself. And what we're here to talk about today, in my case, is my memoir, and that required going through a lot of difficult emotions. Not only going through them, I've been through them, but then figuring out how to make meaning from them, and that was all very difficult. But I've also done writing, journalism and screenwriting, where it's not deeply personal, and I'm sort of not writing about myself, and that is much more, has a different energy and is invigorating in a different way.
Right. Yeah, and there's early in the, at one point in the book, you write, to write about myself for an audience other than myself has necessitated that I attempt to treat myself and my story objectively as a subject of investigation. I've had to be willing to see what was in me and what was in my mother and what has existed between us, which has meant, most importantly, being willing to see what I haven't wanted to see. And that to me encapsulated really what's such a challenge about memoir and going into those uncomfortable places. So I don't know, just maybe to pull on that thread a little longer about having to detach a bit to write fearlessly.
Well, it's really interesting because you have to detach, but you also have to go there and be in those moments, depending on the scene. I had to bring myself back to moments that I don't want to think about and remember and re-experience. And then I have to hike out from those moments and look at it from a more objective point of view. In other words, how would other people see these moments and try to make sense of it? And that's a lot of work, and and a ton of energy. But also, it's not just the experience of something that was difficult, but it's also maturing about, working on this book is forcing me to mature in terms of my own life and in terms of, the things I maybe had to endure. And so, for instance, my default mode is, frankly, to just feel sorry for myself. And, I already mentioned whining, and so that's a similar thing. and so, for instance, when I go into this material to write about it, I'm feeling the pain of something that I've experienced, right? It's easier to go, that's one step, is to go into that feeling again. And then that produces a feeling of, poor me, I had to go through this, and I had a difficult mother, or a difficult relationship with my mother. And, I had a drinking problem, and, who doesn't? But, and then, oh, poor me, And then part of coming out is realizing, actually, my life I've been incredibly fortunate. I have gratitude. I've been incredibly lucky for so many different reasons, And one of those reasons is my mother. And so that's the difficult journey, is to mature around myself. Does that make sense?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's and there's a moment too where your mother refers to this collective story as like our book.
Yeah.
She really kind of tethers herself to it like a barnacle on a whale, and it wasn't the book I was writing; it was the book I was living. Yeah. And this also speaks to needing distance, especially in memoir, to get that meaning that you can hike away and find that perspective. So maybe at what point did you sense that you were in fact ready to tackle this material?
Oh, I started poking away and thinking there was nonfiction here in this material, 15 years ago. And then I kept finding that it wasn't the right time to write about it. For one thing, I was still very much immersed in living it still. And I had not worked through a lot of the stuff in my relationship with my mother and in myself. And I don't know why, but when the New Yorker article came out, that was a sort of turn of the screw for me, where I felt like I had turned a corner with this material.
Mm. Yeah, a moment ago too, you brought up talking about maybe nonfiction, certain things that are hard to approach, and you write a lot of fiction as well. Do you find that you can use fiction as a way to metabolize things, but still keep a bit of distance more than something like a memoir?
Yeah, a lot of memoirs are difficult for me to read because I'm not that interested in hearing someone narrate to me, tell me about their understanding of their life. The kind of memoirs I like are where someone just recreates a scene for me from memory. And so Tobias Wolff's This Boy's Life was first written as a novel, and his agent said, we can't sell this thing. I don't, for some reason, whatever. How about write it as a memoir or rewrite it as a memoir? He took out the stuff that wasn't true. It took him a couple months. He resubmitted it, and it became one of the books that put, memoir, literary memoir back on the map.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love about that book is it's just written scene after scene. He's not spending a ton of time analyzing himself.
Right.
And so as a fiction writer, I tried to, you have to step out, but the way I am bringing that understanding to the page is how I render scenes. From memory, truthfully, but memory is also flawed. And what degree of humor am I bringing to it? You know what I mean? Things like that in the scene is where the commentary is. So I had, I've done a couple readings where people have asked, oh, I really felt like I wanted you to talk to me about all the things you'd learned about this relationship with your mother. And I thought, that's explicitly what I didn't do.
Yeah. Right.
You have to read between the lines, as you do with fiction.
For sure. And, you bringing up Tobias Wolff as a mentor, and he's, I got to say, just what are some things, if you could point to a few that he really coached out of you and, set the example and set the bar for you?
One of the greatest things I learned from him is I have a tendency to think, and I still believe this, is that no one's going to be interested in me unless I am a little bit funnier, if my work is a little bit more over the top, a little bit more melodramatic. And as a writer and as a person, he recognizes, I feel, that in himself and intentionally is always trying to achieve a certain degree of honesty. And I feel like I've spent most of my life failing to do that. And but he's one of my, I guess, his example has always been important to me of just trying to be as honest in the work. And part of that means not overplaying it, just being who you are, telling the story you're going to tell, And in other words, not blowing the scene up too much, not being too melodramatic out of a sense of insecurity that you're afraid no one will find it entertaining.
Yeah, and you've talked about self-pity and whining and stuff, which is something I can totally attest to, and from my own experience, and Ruby being a cheerleader and talking about low self-esteem of writers is, of course, I am one of her clients, and it's in those insufferable moments of self-doubt too. Like, how do you manage to push through that headspace, to get to a place where you're getting something constructive done that you might be able to rework later and maybe a higher level of self-confidence?
Well, I usually either cry or take a nap. And then everything's better afterwards.
Yeah, that's a great sequence. Cry, nap. Yep.
Wake up and try it again. Or I try to read some things that I feel like really inspire me or really important to me.
Yeah, that's a really great point to underscore. And I sometimes use this metaphor, if you will. I imagine that, whatever your favorite band is, if they're feeling stumped in the studio, they don't listen to their own stuff or just crawl into a hole, though I'm sure there is some aspect of that. But I'm guessing that Metallica is pulling down an album from Deep Purple, like a band that was instrumental to their development, and be like, oh yeah, let's see this song phrasing and let's draw inspiration from what's happened before us.
Yeah.
And that will inform what we're trying to do. And so, for you, to what extent, or what are the things that you're pulling down from your library to just inject into your brain as a model of how well it's done, so you can get energized for your own work?
I mean, and there are things I should say that energize me on different levels. I mean, I'll read something that I just know is going to be funny and is going to entertain me, or even watch something on Netflix that I think, wow, that is so good. And I'll be reconnected to the point of doing this. My despair has to do with mostly the career side, not the artist side. If I stay focused on the act of doing the writing and pursuing my path as a writer, whatever that may be, and making that contribution, then it becomes more about continuing to do that act and less about the world's response to it. And that's very, very hard to do because the world may decide they're done listening to you, or whatever, and that doesn't. So to learn how to detach from that, I do that by reading things that, on various levels, just reconnect me with the excitement. And so I recently read this nonfiction book called The Wager. Who wrote that?
David Gran.
Yeah. And I just thought, as a work of nonfiction, as a research, I wish I could do that. I mean, it's just so engaging, and I love nautical things. I'm from Maine, and I picked that book up and read it in like 2 days, and just couldn't put it down.
Yeah, he's a master of that historical recreation, everything. Killers of the Flower Moon, Lost City of Z, The Wager is amazing. It's just, he's an appointment reading. Whenever you see his byline or his book coming out, it's like an event.
Yeah, and just the arc of it, and it's pushing me through. But then a book I love is Gretel Ehrlich's This Cold Heaven. It's about her being up in, Greenland, I think? I don't know. And it's, doesn't have that same driving force. It's really anecdotal. There's something about just being with her and watching her notice this iced world, and these people who live there. And I don't care about the structure. I don't care about I'm not reading it for the plot or to find out what happens. And it's similar to me with, in terms of nonfiction, Svetlana Alexievich, I think is how you say her name. Voices of Chernobyl, Secondhand Time. She is a Nobel Prize winner from Russia, or what is it, Belarus? I'm sorry if I'm getting these things wrong. But anyway, she collects people's stories and weaves them together. And so she's more of a curator or almost an anthropologist. Her career was really in journalism. And so Secondhand Time is about Russia, and she goes and interviews these people, these veterans, and people living in Russia post perestroika, and it gets all these different points of view. People who wish Stalin would come back, people who hate capitalism now, and they feel like it failed them. The promises and just the portraits she creates. And it's the same with Voices of Chernobyl. I mean, it is just heartbreaking, and nothing can replace this sort of pointillist, view of things where you're getting many, many different points of view of a single event, these sort of geological layers. So it doesn't have a single narrative arc. But to me, I'm like, how can I do that in fiction or in memoir or in essay, where I can just create that kind of excitement that I'm reaching out and touching real life,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like looking outside of, say your little cloistered genre that you might traffic most of your work in. It's like when I was writing The Front Runner, I was inspired structurally by the Last Dance docuseries of Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And I desperately wanted to have this like over the top. By that I mean literally like this narrative that's going over the top of The Last Dance for Pre's life, and I couldn't pull it off. But it's like I love that you brought up finding something maybe on Netflix or something else that is giving you an inspiration. Be like, oh, how can I do that?
Yeah.
With your own work, and I think that's just really breaking outside of your own little bubble to find that inspiration is like. That's where some of the juice is. Like you can model that stuff and bring it over to your playground, your sandbox.
Yeah. Yeah, and the great thing about being a writer is you can move around. I mean, we're here to talk about a memoir, and I'm not ready to climb that mountain maybe ever again, although I've started another essay collection called Bonehead. The subtitle is, Tales of an American Male. But no one will publish this, so it's okay. But I'm more and more interested in doing what you've been doing, which is writing about other people. I'm really tired of myself. In a good sense. Mm-hmm. Like I've mined whatever is in me in my little, very normal life, like a middle-class American white male, to give to you. I think I've mined it pretty thoroughly, and I'd really, if I can do some interesting things in writing about other people, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, and you a moment ago you brought up kind of the career path versus the author path, and that like the artist path, and then. It's like in that career path, I think lies a lot of where sometimes like resentments and jealousies and bitternesses start to surface. And I know that I've suffered that from that in myriad ways. It's the crucible through which this podcast was formed in 2013. I was just so angry and frustrated. Yeah. And it's one of those things that we might not want to admit, but it's definitely something a lot of us experience. And just from you, just in the arc of your career, how have you metabolized those comparison feelings where you're looking over your shoulder and you're like, how the hell did that person get that? And here I am in this pile of sewage.
I cry and then I take a nap. And then if it gets really bad, I call my medical provider and make an appointment. And they say, well, I don't know. Sometimes I have to just go out, and this is why I have a wood shop. I have like a lot of tools I barely know how to use, and probably at some point will cut my fingers off. But I love to make things, and in the wood shop I go out there and can make things, and there's no pressure. I'm not comparing myself. I do compare myself because that's who I am. Because like I have an uncle who's a real craftsman and a woodworker, cabinet maker, and then my cousin is a wooden boat builder, and these guys can do incredible things, and I compare myself to them. And if I had two lives, I'd probably do something else because I've lived this life, and I'd rather work with wood. But for the second one, but anyway, this is a way. It's another outlet. It's a way of removing myself, and then I have to be very philosophical or spiritual, if you will, like that. I've been incredibly lucky. If it all ends now and crashes down, and I've been incredibly fortunate just as a human being, and that is always something I have to come back to, I mean, we all know this. There's no promises of success in anything. There's no promises of anything. And there is no sense that reason why one person suffers the earthquake in Haiti and I get to write my little tales of woe. And so that's the ultimate thing is I'm here I have to remind myself what my values are and what the truth is, and the truth is I'm here to do the best job I can, and that involves other people. So getting over myself and being a part of the world.
Right. I can attest that nothing good remotely happened to me until I started trying to lift others up.
Yeah.
For sure. Like until I started doing this and platforming other people and celebrating other people's work instead of being bitter and angry that someone else is getting some cover story. I'm like, I could have written that. And then the fact that it's like, no, you couldn't have. You weren't ready for it.
Or you probably could have. It's just you didn't get it,
Yeah. That's just
that
it.
Sucks.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's just so much rejection. Speaking of that, that's a great segue to some rejection. How have you dealt with rejection over the years? Because everyone in this audience is about to deal with
it's an endless. What do they call what we're experiencing? The aqua river, the atmospheric river. Being a writer is an atmospheric river of rejection.
It is.
And,
it really, really is.
And but you gotta just start from the other end of it, which I try to do and ask myself, well, why would anyone care anyway? I mean, and anyway, and people read for different reasons. And so when I'm working on my finely wrought short stories or a little essay or my little boutique memoir here, I have to understand that it's really, there aren't that many people in the world who even want to read that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which is why I've tried to work in other genres too, But ultimately, inspiration from some of these athletes or people who've really had to overcome things are stories that I love to. Worked on this film about the Afghan girls robotics team called Rule Breakers, came out last year, and these young women were so inspirational. They had to overcome the Taliban, their families, the whole culture they lived in. And then, of course, the Taliban retook the country and they scattered all over the world. And they're still going to school, going to college, and one of them goes to the U of O here. Things like that. I mean, the world is conspiring against you in everything you may want, and often. And so, but also, look for the doors that open. If a door is closed, instead of curling up and crying and taking a nap in front of that closed door, you can get up and say, what other doors might be open?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what led me to doing this film, I knocked on one of these doors, I keep knocking, hey, this door opened. And it's hard to live that way, It's easier to choose a career where, you get trained to do something, you go out and you do it. And, it's not a massive amount of daily questioning and rejection.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the atmospheric river of rejection. It's good. It is persistent. But I'd love to get a sense of how you're thinking about structure. And maybe we can tie in character witness to this because it is a memoir. It says memoir on the title, but it feels essayistic, but they are bound by a certain connective tissue. So how are you thinking about structure was specifically to this?
Not thinking enough about it is what some would say. I feel like a lot of traditional memoir really does focus on, oh my God, your life was terrible. You had no chance. And then you climb this mountain and then now, you've totally succeeded. You've overcome all these incredibly horrible obstacles. The memoir people don't want to read is, your life was, pretty good. Your dad was a lawyer and you're, normal middle-class guy and you were neurotic and drank too much and your mom was, a troubled person and then you cried a lot and then you curled up in a ball too much and then things got a little better.
Yeah.
That's not the structure they're looking for, And so I kept thinking, well, that's, I'm being very flippant, but that's, to me, why it doesn't have quite the dramatic arc, It does have an arc, I did get sober, and then I worked on things, but it's not this rags to riches kind of archetype that we're looking for often in memoir. But those are the memoirs I don't read. Even if they're true, I realize that the literary book culture, the gatekeepers have curated, all the things that people write, they curate towards that kind of story because it sells books. you know.
Yeah.
And but I'm actually more interested in essay collections half the time, you know, that have a little bit of arc to it, you know.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you toggle between, you know, your mother as a character is, you know, on the one hand just like maddening, and you know, and you're feeling like why is someone doing this to herself and to other people around her? And then there are other, you know, instances where you see her, like her heart and her humanity come out, and then you're like, oh wow, like you really soften and sort of surrender to that. And then another one would be like, oh my God, why is she like this in this particular instance? So how did you just navigate writing that into that ebb and flow of her as a character in the page?
Yeah, well, and that's really interesting in terms of structure, because I did have some people say, well, I'm noticing this structure where things get a little bit better with your mother, and then they revert and get worse again. That's not so great for narrative structure. I said, but actually that's what happens in life, right? And then I, as I have in many ways, I've had this experience, you know, when they start in the New Yorker piece and in the book, you know, there's this impulse to put on the cover, you know, things like incest survivor, or memoir addiction. I mean, not memoir addiction, memoir of addiction or something. And that implies that there's going to be this sort of, you know, kind of arc that you climb this mountain out of, where in fact life is messier than that. And yet there is that. And also I don't subscribe to a lot of those boxes. I actually see my story. My approach to it was, what I've experienced is incredibly normal, you know, in many ways, like difficult parent, neurotic kid, sensitive kid, and nothing I've experienced really is all that extraordinary or out of the norm. And so that, I'm conscious of that as my very important feeling about this book, while I'm sort of working against this impulse. I feel like that I'm supposed to be saying, this is the special experience that I have to deliver to you. And how do I resolve that in the structure where I do need a sense of arc? And the arc of the story is really that, like, my life continued and has continued to get better and better, and I'm happy. I have a wonderful family. I have a beautiful daughter, and I love my work. And my mother, you know, never really climbed out of the... she never reached escape velocity from the childhood that she had.
Right.
And that's sad. And then that widening gap between the two of us became a source of pain.
Oh, right. And she would accuse you of being elitist because you did achieve that exit velocity.
Yeah.
And as a result, you can either choose to try to, you know, leave that orbit, or you can let it pull you down. And, you know, similarly, just from my own experience, like I have to put on, like with my mother, like a loser cap, because there's a thing, I have to play a part with her, because if I show that I have lifted myself up out of maybe whatever mire we were experiencing, it's like all of a sudden, oh, I can't relate to you anymore. Like so in order for me to have any degree of connection, I had to really tamp down any success I've ever had. Otherwise, she might think I've achieved elitism, and I really could relate to that tension that you were experiencing with your mother too.
Yeah. And anyway, so that's why I feel like some of the way, you know, that there's a tendency to frame this book, it isn't quite how I would frame it. I just feel like this is stuff we're all experiencing. Yeah. To one degree or another, you know. So. Yeah,
and it's kind of echoing something you said a moment ago. You know, just I think it had to do with kind of the arc of, like, say, like a recovery memoir or whatever. But you wrote that most of us think we're free and clear once that habit is broken, you know, whatever that habit might be. But later there is the crisis of facing what led us to abuse alcohol and drugs at such a young age in the first place. And so it's just like something. It's like you achieved a certain measure of exit velocity, but that thing that maybe caused you to go down a certain path, you know, it keeps following you.
If you reach a point where you have to stop drinking, the stopping drinking is in many ways the easiest part. And you think, good, done with that. No. Because if you reach that point, you're sitting on a mountain of things that will become your memoir someday. And it can only become a memoir, though, if you deal with it in such a way and come to a certain understanding that you feel like the journey you took through that is going to be you're going to find things that are useful to other people in what you can report back. That's the hard part.
Yeah, the observations I had, like there are aspects of recovery, but this wasn't a recovery memoir necessarily. It was kind of recovery around a parent in a lot of ways, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've read so many Drunkalog memoirs where it's like all about all this bad behavior, and it's not any. We've all read Jesus' Son, and that was amazing, but so I'm not going to write that. It's not what it's about.
Yeah, and spoiler or some point, but your mother, passes away. Did you feel like your mother needed to pass away for you to enter this material and to, approach it and to have it published?
No, because I assumed that was the plan. I would wait until she passed away, and then I realized she was never going to pass away. Her mother lived to 95, but her, and I just thought I've got to just do it and that's when, I also started talking to her about, while I was doing it, I started talking to her about it. And then, so one of the most amazing moments to me is the New Yorker is this incredible fact-checking operation. And so they had 2 calls with my mother before they published that piece. And I'm just like, I was practically having a heart attack, Oh, yeah, the New Yorker called me. And we had a great conversation about you. And I just thought, I didn't cry, but I almost had a panic attack. Mm-hmm. It's easier to cry than have the panic attack, but sometimes the panic attack is necessary when your mom has just talked to the New Yorker about you for an hour. Yeah. And they still published it. I don't know what they decided exactly.
Well, perfect. All right. Well, this is, maybe a great place for us to bring our conversation down for a landing. And what I always love doing, Jason, at this point is asking the guest, you in this case, for a recommendation of some kind for the listeners out there. And that's just like anything you're excited about that is bringing you any modicum of joy that's taking you out of nap and cry mode, and just what you might recommend for everyone out there.
Well, I would definitely recommend The Wager by, what's his name again?
David Grann.
Thank you. My brain is Swiss cheese. And if you haven't read Gretel Ehrlich's This Cold Heaven, I would definitely read that. So.
Oh, fantastic! And I read someone DM'd me on Instagram, Matt Caputo, who's
oh yeah.
You know Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was just like, he's like, you're having Jason on? I'm like, yeah. He's like, have you read Driving the Heart? I'm like, no. I'm like, can I find it online? He's like, I don't think so. So I went to the library and I got it.
Nice.
And I read that story, and I like that to me reads like talk about like gripping, pacing, and I was like, this could be journalism too. I could picture a reporter riding shotgun with someone doing that too. Like, it really inspired me. I was like, maybe I should find someone who drives organs around. But in any case, it was just like, you got to read that.
You found them. I used to.
Yeah.
No, that was one of my jobs when I first got sober.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, mostly eyeballs.
All right.
There's a lot of eyeballs and kidneys. Sorry, this is real. I'm not having a mental breakdown. No, I actually had this job.
Well, it's awesome. So, like, my point being, I'm bringing that up because I would just recommend Driving the Heart in stories as well as Character Witness. So, just in any case, Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show and coming in front of this audience and sharing a bit about Character Witness and how you go about the work. So, thanks so much for coming.
Well, Brendan, I'm honored to be here, and thanks to you and Ruby. I really appreciate it.
You got it. And thank you, everyone. Yes. Awesome. And so we've come to the end. Big thanks to Jason for coming down to Gratitude on relatively short notice to join us for a live podcast. Pretty great. Don't forget to subscribe to Ye Old CNF Pod wherever you get your podcasts, and fire up your email machine for the Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter and Pitch Club at welcometoPitchClub.substack.com. Not Pitch Club. Pitch Club. Okay? It had been a long time since I submitted anything cold. A goal publication of mine is McSweeney's Internet Tendency. I've pitched 4 or 5 pieces to them over the years and have been rejected every time. I wrote a shorty about author photos and what they signify. You know, like a lot of author photos come with, you know, there's the pensive one looking off into distance. There's the very earnest one. Or then maybe there's the goofy one. Or maybe there's no photo at all. Anyway, so that was the riff. My rejection note from editor Christopher Monks was, "Hi, Brendan, we're going to pass. Thanks for considering us. Best, Chris." Now, I understand to even receive a rejection almost counts as publication in this climate of ignoring. But man, it still stings. Here's this thing you kind of like labor over for hours, and then it's just like, nope. And I hadn't felt this sting in a while. Not because I've been pitching with a high degree of success, but because I hadn't been pitching at all. And I want to land some work in 2026 just for the sheer creative pulse of it all, hence the Flash 52 challenge. Oh, what's that? You didn't catch it in the December newsletter? Anyway, the goal is to write one Flash essay a week for a year. And I think just in the Patreon community is where I'll link up to either writing a community or prompts to make that happen. Patreon.com/CNFpod. It's all about community, baby. Anyway, pitching this essay to McSweeney's internet tendency. It was a good exercise to refresh myself on how shitty it feels and how personal it feels. Even though it shouldn't, it does. It just does. My confidence, already something of a rare earth metal, took a major nosedive after that short little rejection. Now, I imagine that publication probably receives double-digit submissions a day. So logically, I know it's nothing personal. It's likely a very gut decision, a gut reaction. Like, oh, this made me laugh, or oh, this sounds like someone trying too hard. And he sends off a one-sentence rejection. Is there a better word for rejection? A rebuff? By the way, paging through my dictionary here, I was looking for synonyms for rejection. I came across rejectamenta, and it's a word. It is an actual word, and it is things or matter rejected as useless or worthless. Now, there's our next sponsor for episode 504. Yeah, I just signed him up, sent over the contract. But I like to remind myself, and certainly others, that rejections mean you're in the arena, right? That famously hijacked Ted Roosevelt quote, commandeered by Brene Brown and tech bros and life coaches. But it's true. I'd rather shoot my fucking shot and miss than sit around tinkering on something to death. Make no mistake, this game is subjective, and it's a numbers game. The more you submit, the better your chances, be it for essays or features, books or poems or whatever. That's not an excuse to ship garbage. You should ship things when they're ready. That doesn't mean they're perfect, and that doesn't mean they can't be tweaked. But when shit is ready, and when it's in a good place, it deserves to get on the field. Go ahead, get it out there. That may be, good enough, but more than likely it will need work. But you take pride in the fact that you're getting your shit out there because that's what a professional does. That's what a working writer does. That's what an artist does. Plus, if you're, say, coaching or editing, mentoring, it helps to know the sting, to have to ice down the swelling, so you can better relate to others who might not be quite as seasoned or scarred or weathered. At every turn, you want to walk the walk. And even when you have some books under your belt or a few essays, maybe a lot of essays over the years, columns, whatever, it's easy to not share the rejections and keep projecting this image of constant crushing. It's even more important for the accomplished and the semi-accomplished writers to share their rejection slips so we can see that people, even with a track record, maybe awards, maybe books, maybe some burrito money to spare, suffer the sting of the impersonal rejection. When we normalize it and not demonize it, we can get back to work. Maybe with a little road rash, but that'll clear up in due time, right? So stay wild, CNFers, and if you can't do interview, see ya.